Welcome back to another episode of the Altmed podcast. Andrew Dowling here with me as always, my co-host Mitch Kirst. And
Hello.
We are delighted to have an old friend join us today. It is none other than Lewie, who is the co-founder and CEO of Flyers Cocktail Co. We're chatting to him live in Brooklyn, New York. Lewie, welcome to the show.
G'day guys, thanks for having me. Excited for the chat.
Yeah. Us too.
Good to see you again.
Yeah,
it's
been a while. It's kind of customary, but we have a bit of an idea of your background. But for our audience, can you take them through how you got into this space, what you're doing beforehand? Because you have led a fairly extraordinary life until now. So take us through it.
Yeah. I can skip all that fun stuff if you like. But I came to New York in 2015 after a year or two of traveling the world. I worked in the corporate world a little bit before that. Got too much, decided to quit my job and go backpacking. Spent all my money, came to New York and started to start my own agency. And that's kind of where I started working in the beverage industry in the US. And so I had a few early beverage clients. And then that kind of escalated to working on projects, consulting with like PepsiCo, Anheuser-Busch, Heineken, Constellation, like the behemoths in the beverage world. And we would help build out their insights and innovation pipelines. And so, we got a really, really close, really close in the industry to work with people that were at the bleeding edge of, new brands, new products and innovation. And we specialized in non-alc, so we work with Anheuser-Busch and help them build out some of their non-alc portfolio. And, we knew that with big beverage, they're really good at allocating funds to new products and new brands, but not as good at launching those new products and new brands. And what I mean by that is, it kind of gets lost to the, the commercial viability of the product, not necessarily like the quality of the product. And so in this non-alc space, we were kind of like, all right, we know there's a huge demand. People are shifting away from consuming alcohol into consuming other types of products. But we also knew that the non-alc space didn't offer the, what we thought was needed, which was function. Because during an alcohol occasion, you're looking for a certain level of either vice or an out or something that relaxes you. And if you just base it on flavor, there's a lot of gaps. And so we kind of took that opportunity and we knew, all right, we have worked with these big beverage companies. We've also worked with some cannabis companies in the past, more about it from a branding perspective. We put those two things together and highlighted our white space. And that's how we came up with Flyers Cocktail Co. And so that's, we started this in 2020. And the impetus for it was that big beverage, when all of the bars closed, their marketing budgets kind of dry up a little bit because they're just trying to survive, let alone innovate. And so those budgets from an agency perspective had also dried up. So we're kind of like, all right, how do we pivot here? And is it time for our own thing? And so effectively we started in 2020 and then we launched in November 3 months ago. So we're deep launch mode 3 months in and it's really exciting.
Yeah, beautiful. It's so good to just see always Australians abroad just smashing it. We're really excited to have you on here. But you might need to explain to some people, we're stuck in Australia where that rec market doesn't quite exist. So delineating a little bit, just for the people that are listening in Australia and don't fully realize a little bit about how the medical versus recreational space works in the States as a
and I'm thinking actually some of our audience might be sort of asking the question, do you need a prescription to buy a CBD drink in America? Because that's sort of front of mind for everyone here. So talk us through how medical and recreational works over there.
Yeah, totally. It's really exciting because it's changing every week and every state is different. But basically, 2018, hemp was federally legalized, including all its cannabinoid components. So all the major and minor cannabinoids that are hemp derived. And it was legal as long as it's below 0.3% THC on a per weight basis. And so effectively the hemp market exploded from 2018. It means that it's federally legal to sell CBD, like hemp derived CBD products. And because of that, a lot of, there was tinctures, edibles, beverages started to explode in the space. And the challenge is that at the moment, it's still not FDA approved, and that's ingestible hemp. And so there's still gray area. The federal legalization said, okay, we're going to legalize it, but we're going to leave it up to the states to decide how they're going to implement it. And so, of course, it ends up with this crazy patchwork of state by state laws. You know, we can sell technically to 35 states, and there's about 10 states that say no ingestible hemp. Some states say, yes, it's allowed, but only if it's grown in our state. And so that's a mess on that front, but really, really interesting. And then on the medical side of the business, 18 states have legalized it in some format, right? So again, it's not federally legal on the medicinal side of things, but on a state-by-state perspective, you can access it in various different forms. So like California, you can just go to a dispensary. You don't even need any license. You can walk in and it's like an Apple store. You can there's a bud tender and they ask you like what problems you're trying to solve. And you're like, I want to sleep or I want to feel high, whatever the case is. Or in some states are just medicinal only. So you have to have some version of a license from a doctor to allow you to go into those stores. And there's everything in between. But the states are kind of dropping like flies. And the reason is because there's a huge budget deficit from COVID. And they see California that had $3 billion of cannabis sales in revenue and $500 million in tax revenue from that. And so now those other states that have their huge budget deficits are incentivized to fast track legalization. So this year, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey are all legalizing. And that'll be basically the biggest tri-state market on the planet for medicinal cannabis, which is called the adult use market here in the US.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
That's
Amazing.
really interesting, actually. I mean, like, I'm just thinking about how it almost works in reverse in Australia. Like when Victoria sort of legalized access to medical cannabis, it was the first state, I think that was 2016. Other states followed, and that put pressure on the federal government to have to kind of consider adjusting its framework to allow Victorians to be able to access medical cannabis. Other states then followed suit. Whereas it sounds like in America, there might be a decision federally, but then they sort of defer back to the states to kind of make up their own mind, which, as you say, it's a complex patchwork. And this is just a curveball, but I'm just curious, what states are really anti-cannabis? I've got a bit of an idea. I'm guessing some of the deep South,
South Dakota, Nebraska, Texas is a bit slow. Like there's a few that are anti, but in time, money talks, so it'll change.
Exactly. Yeah, Texas loves cash, so.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, in terms of the drink portfolio, is that a CBD only play at the moment, or is there like plans, or do you see THC drinks? Do you see CBG, CBN drinks? Like what's the market look like in terms of the drinks?
Really great question, because that's exactly what we're in right now. So we launched with full spectrum hemp beverages, which includes CBD as well as CBG, a little bit of CBN, and 0.0002% THC, because it's below the 0.3% mark. So we have the entourage effect of full spectrum hemp. Some beverages have like CBD isolate, some have a mix of CBD and CBG and some other things, but we decided to go with the full range. And that allows us to effectively build the brand and sell to nearly all of the states effectively. We can sell online, we can sell through retail, all of those elements. And so that allows us to scale faster. When it comes to THC, we're about to initiate our THC beverages, but that is on a state-by-state basis, and you have to be completely vertically integrated in every state. So from seed to sale. So it has to be grown, manufactured, like produced, manufactured, sold through dispensary, and consumed all within the state. So our current supply chain, we grow our hemp in Washington. We've got a Colorado facility that water solubilizes it. We've got a co-packer in Georgia. We've got a fulfillment center in Long Island. It's from all over the place. When it comes to THC, we have to work with, rebuild our supply chain in every market. And so to move faster, we're identifying some pilot markets we want to launch in. And then when New York legalizes at the end of this year, that's really where the biggest opportunity is for us. There's a few beverages already out in the West Coast, like quite a lot, and some really, really cool innovation going on there. And you see anywhere from like a 2 milligram THC in a can to 100 milligram glass bottles, which blows my mind because I'd be on the moon if I consumed that much. But that's actually the #1 seller in California, which is really interesting. So great innovation, a lot of opportunity there. We've got the hemp, full spectrum hemp, CBD versions, and then we're going to be launching our THC versions soon. We're just navigating how many milligrams is what we have, the source of the THC, like with live resin, and then how much CBD we want to include in there as well. So anyway, it's fun, and we're about to go do some flavor testing out on the West Coast in about a month's time. So that's going to be a good couple of days.
Can Mitch and I tag along to that?
Yeah, mate, come on over. Yeah.
I had a question just about, I mean, one of the things that's a pretty hot topic here in Australia, and obviously different paradigm in the sense that we're really only talking about prescription only medical cannabis. But I'm curious, do they have limits for driving? I know in a lot of states, the one time I went to the US, some states were 0.08 for some 0.05 for alcohol, but have they actually introduced thresholds for detection of THC or anything like that? Or is it basically strict, zero, must be zero and that's it?
Yeah, I'm not actually sure. And I know it's definitely on a state by state basis. And there are actually, these kind of regulations are a bit slow to move, big ships are slow to turn. And so when a state legalizes, there's usually some form of requirement about what that limit is. I'm not familiar with what the states are from a driving perspective, but I think that they probably can do a better job of kind of enforcing it.
And we know that in California, drinking 100 milligrams of THC is probably not suitable for driving.
Yeah,
there's plenty to do it though. I'm like for sure. But
I guess driving in New York, I could behind a car and I'm like, am I getting high driving from the car in front of me?
Yeah, I've seen some pretty interesting stuff when I did some time over there. But there was a question I had for sure, and I know you've got a very good answer. And for some of our more technical listeners, the idea that cannabis inherently is lipophilic, which means that it's fat soluble. I'm very curious to know your thoughts on the absorption of it. If you're saying if it's in a drink as opposed to oil or something fatty like I don't know, avocado pills or something like that. But can you walk us through how that works from a drink perspective?
Yeah, definitely can. So there's a lot of different technologies here in the US that use different versions of either encapsulations or water soluble technology. And they all have a different level of molecule size that results in a level of absorption in the body. So larger molecules, like over 100 nanometers or above, are more metabolized in your body, and they're more, they'll get influenced by being lipophilic or not. Our technology actually is more like nanotechnology, where the particle size is below 50 nanometers. And so your blood-brain barrier on average is about 50 nanometers. And so if you have particle sizes or molecules that are smaller than that, it actually passes straight through into the blood-brain barrier and avoids being metabolized and avoids the challenges that you just spoke of. And so for us, we have a really fast absorption. It's like 6 to 9 minute onset where it starts being in your bloodstream, but it also means it's a fast offset. So in an hour, it's out of your bloodstream. So it's not like an edible where you have a few milligrams and then you're on the moon for 4 hours. It allows your beverage to be sessionable, and you can also, it means it increases the efficacy of the product as well. So if we have a beverage that's 3 or 4 milligrams, you're going to feel a lot of it. The bioavailability is way higher because it passes through your blood-brain barrier. Now, there's different types of tech out there. We kind of reviewed them all over a year ago, and they're continuing to improve and improve. The challenge is with the particle size is the smaller that you get, the more bitter it becomes. And from a food and beverage perspective, that's really challenging because you usually have to mask that. And so for us though, when you make an old fashioned, you take whiskey and you add bitters to it. So the bitterness of the small particle size is an advantage for us because we're cocktails. So we leaned into that and we didn't mask any of the bitterness in our product. And that's a core component of the beverage. Now it's not like a grassy, hempy kind of flavor, but it's just like a bitter flavor. And that's because our particle size is so small, absorption's really fast, efficacy is really high. Everybody's happy.
Interesting. So hold on, it's not mixed with alcohol, is it?
Alcohol-free. No, we call it cocktails, but because no alcohol.
Are there those products? Are there like cannabis and alcohol?
No, it's not allowed. So they, as part of the 2018 hemp regulations, is they didn't have any data on it, and they were avoiding. Can't mix any alcohol. But in like the UK, I'm pretty sure they can, and I think there is some beverages that have both, which kind of blows my mind. But
yeah, I've seen that. You're told when you have cannabis in Australia, at least, that you're meant to stay away from the alcohol, and I know firsthand that it can have an effect inadvertently. But yeah, no, that's very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sort of thinking about, so effectively you can have, I mean, we think of it in terms of a dose because it's in that medical framework here, but yeah, for want of a better term, your drink contains a smaller dose of CBD, but it's just, you get more out of it because of the fact that it's in a liquid, as you say, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. That is really
it's perfect for power naps, it sounds like.
Yeah.
You can just have a quick one.
We found we were drinking these during the day, and it's not conducive to work, particularly in a startup. So we kind of now just pushed it to like later in the day, which is kind of perfect. You know, you have a really stressful day, crack open one of these, everything's good.
Yeah.
So how do people find your product? I know there's different formats because, you know, obviously in Australia, you've got to go to a doctor, you've got to get it from a pharmacy. It's the only way you can do it unless you want to go black market. But, you know, you guys are dealing with some different stuff like on-site consumption, I think is in the works, and there's home delivery aspects. There's all these different, like, you know, almost like wine club type situations that happen in the States. Take us through some of that and kind of where the beverage fits in with all that.
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting. So we talk about this, you know, we did a raise and we talked to our investors about, like, we anticipate this future where everybody's at a bar, you're drinking alcohol, Andrew, you're drinking non-alc or a low-alc beverage, and I'm drinking a cannabis beverage, but we're all consuming these beverages together. That's the kind of future that we envisage. And so different states have different laws about their where you can buy it. So some are dispensaries only. That's the only place you can buy it. Some allow at-home delivery through like online partners like Ease and a few others. And then in New York, the reason they had to bring this in, but it's on-site consumption is in the current draft regulations, which means you're going to have consumption lounges, you're going to have consumption bars, and you know there was an event out in the West Coast called Hall of Flowers, which was a premier cannabis event, and a year ago they had a lounge where they had a small bar in the corner and they had just like 5,000 square feet of everyone just chilling in couches and smoking or whatever. This year, half of it was a bar. And there was like 20 different cannabis beverages, and everyone's in this fancy bar sitting there drinking their cannabis, and it's just like completely changed now. So the consumption method has really evolved from just the plant itself to all these different formats, and the ability to consume it in different scenarios and social occasions and inside, outside, at bars, and is also evolving. And New York wants to be, as a state, wants to be the leading example of really good cannabis regulations. And so they spent a lot of time and money in building them out. There's also a big social equity element to it as well. And then other states are continuing to evolve their regulations as well. So even if it's just dispensaries, they're effectively beginning to legalize like at-home delivery. And that helps them with legacy markets like the black market, because if you can text your guy and he rocks up with a suitcase full of whatever you want, you're not paying any taxes and it's all amazing. Like, why would you go to the dispensary and pay double for something that's not as good? And so the at-home delivery market is something that these stats now are kind of like, okay, this is like online purchasing of cannabis is increasing. That's obviously tax opportunity as well. And those are loosening a little bit in each of the states.
Oh, that's really, that's great. I love the thought of that Hall of Flowers bar. That sounds incredible. I know there's people that I've spoken to, patients in Australia, who talk about, some people really enjoy the kind of full botanical profile of a given strain with their medicine, and they actually enjoy the taste, but some people really don't like it. If they're, using a dropper from a tincture bottle. But yeah, there's some drinks. I mean, at that event, did you see some drinks where they're just trying to completely mask the flavor of the cannabis in the drink, and and then others that really embrace it? I mean, I'm just curious to give a peek of what we might see in the future in Australia if we go and allow these products into Australia. What might we see?
Totally. Well, the first movers were really like seltzers, and so they were like fairly basic flavor profiles, and they masked the bitterness of these products. You'd have like blood orange or lemon and that kind of stuff. But because it was quite bitter, they had to use ingredients that also helped mask that. And so if you use a citrus, it helps. That works really well with bitterness. But now you're seeing an evolution of products that, there's wines that are infused, there's beers that are infused, there's large format cocktail bottles of like spirits that are infused. And so you're seeing now this like complex range of flavors, and some of them, there's everything. Some lean into the bitterness, there's particularly like ours, and then some completely try and mask it as much as they can because it's not ideal to the flavor profile of their particular product. But it's really interesting to see, every week there's a new brand that comes out with a new product, and we do our best to get our hands on it and love trying it all and seeing what's out there. And we really believe like a rising tide raises all boats. And so when we see someone that comes in the market, we're always just excited about it. We try and connect with them. We try and help them out with resources, and we're like, let's go. We're all in this together.
Yeah, love it.
It's interesting. I was watching, I can't remember the name of it. Was it Bon Appetit or Cooked with Cannabis? Something on Netflix. It was a cooking show with cannabis. I'm just thinking, you can't really drink with that because you just get completely catatonic. But if like, I'm thinking about like matching wines with a degustation meal, but like a matching kind of fly cocktail kind of thing with the right kind of cannabis dish that's got a leaf in a component or something like that. You can really see where this is going in the future. I think there's going to be some very interesting and creative things once you open up that recreational market that we just don't see in a place like Australia.
Mate, I think you're spot on. And the big thing for us is like, there's a, relatively small amount of people that are consuming cannabis in terms of the 320 million people. And the pathway to get those people that don't consume it is in familiar formats. So like, you imagine at the end where you have you end up your dinner and you have a nice piece of chocolate and it's 1 milligram. It's just a nice little feeling. Everyone's still with it. They consume the chocolate together. That's familiar, and you're probably going to be less scared about that kind of experience. Same thing with a beverage. Your mum's probably not going to light up a spliff and like smoke it for a few hours. But if you give her a beverage with, maybe yours, but but a beverage is going to be a lot easier. And to help we call it the cannabis curious, to help them move into the space. Sure. And get a little bit of understanding. And we see these products, particularly like beverages, to help that transition.
Yeah, you're starting to see it in everything. Toothpaste, like chocolate spread, I've seen it in like all sorts of stuff. So it's prolific over there. It's quite amazing. It's hard to think of in Australia where it's really quite controlled. So it's great. And I'm curious, where do you think, America's so far ahead of the curve already. Where do you think it'll be in 5 years, kind of thing?
Hard because everyone's throwing around all like, when is federal legalization going to happen? If it's going to happen, when is it going to happen? And no one really knows. There's a bunch of legislations that are being trying to be pushed right now, but I really just think it depends on the timing and the political landscape. And so really it's up to the states that are making all the moves. And we feel New York is going to be one of the leaders of those states. They're fairly liberal in general, but also in terms of the regulations by allowing on-site consumption, at-home delivery, and dispensaries as well. And so we really feel that, we like it when there's some people that have brand experience and product experience that deliver a really sophisticated premium cannabis product to the market, because that's the kind of stuff that's really going to help the market grow and grow faster. And I think that, 10 years ago, there was some scary products released that wasn't very regulated. The testing wasn't so good. It was just kind of like, the variation even within the single product was so high. And so now you're seeing, consistent products. You're seeing like specific strains being used in different products and different occasions. And so I really feel that the premium food and beverage category, like outside of cannabis, that people are taking a lot of pages from that book and bringing it in. And I do think that you will see a thriving cannabis market on a state-by-state basis. And the states that don't legalize it in a particular way are going to fall behind, and they'll effectively be forced to change, I believe.
And what do you think about the appetite of Americans would be for Australian weed in the future?
Mate, we wanted to do that. We were like, wouldn't it be amazing if you could have a provenance of Australian grown weed over in the US? And we looked at that from a hemp perspective, and there's such a massive oversupply of hemp in the US that it just did not make sense to do that. Sure. There's actually a New Zealand farm called Puro that are actually going to be doing it. And that is like, imagine the rolling hills.
We've had Tom on the podcast.
Oh, great. Love him. Yeah. So that's actually who we got connected with to chat about all this. And, he's talking about like where the Marlborough wine is grown and why the sun is better for that scenario and the crops are going to be better there. And you can imagine a New Zealand or Australian based product sold in the US. That would be amazing. But international trade is a whole nother coin. I don't know about that.
Yeah, no, Tom, he's our favorite agronomist. We need to actually chat to him again, Mitch. Yeah, when we saw the photos of the farms in New Zealand, that he's been working with, just looks incredible. I had just a question about, I mean, we've kind of alluded to the fact that one by one, there's this domino effect with states in America falling. I mean, money talks, as you say, they're trying to plug revenue gaps. Do you feel like there's kind of, I mean, for those of us interested, we see guys like, I think it's Congressman Patrick Kennedy, and he's a real anti-cannabis, anti-drug politician over there. Are those voices effectively being drowned out now that the states are falling one by one, do you feel, or is there still quite a concerted campaign that's being launched against these things? And secondary to that, just curious about whether alcohol is joining in on the green tide and getting involved, or are they trying to resist it as well?
Yeah, it's actually really lively on all sides. And so there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of like be proactive people, and there's a lot of defense as well. On big beverage, it's actually really interesting because nearly all the time, the innovation and budgets in food and beverage come from the large companies. And for the first time, probably in history, they actually can't play in that space because they're a publicly traded company with the SEC, and they cannot dip their toes into it unless they invest into a cannabis company. And so that's what they've done today. So wow. Like the Aurora, Tilray, Cannabis Growth, they can only just throw millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to those companies and let them do their best in the beverage world, but they actually can't use any of their resources outside of that unless they move them across. So it's really interesting, and it's actually an opportunity for startup brands like us to get as much market share as we can to capitalize on that opportunity. And so, you know, and also an example of what's going on, like Amazon sees a huge opportunity in cannabis. They are throwing millions of dollars in lobbying to the government to try and legalize weed. They stopped testing all of their employees recently. They're really, really pushing it, and they want to see themselves, well, ideally see themselves as being a platform where you can purchase the product. And so that is really like, you know, in the last 2 years, this has all come about, and it's really, really has changed. And there's a lot of momentum. You know, right now there's a Safe Banking Act that's trying to be pushed through legislation to allow all the banks to actually service the market legally, because right now there's only a specific set of banks that you can work with, and it's really, really challenging and expensive, and traditional banks can't. And so there's, you know, and I think there's actually like 5 or 6 different pieces of legislation that they're trying to push through at any one time. And so lots of movement, both sides, a little bit of some conservative folks that are trying to like slow it down or something like that. But I really feel that, you know, it's a rising
hard
tide,
to stop.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That policy affects globally as well. Like it affects all those institutions that even Australians try to use, and you know, Stripe, things like that, PayPal. Those policies that are made in the US, you know, have quite far-reaching consequences.
Yeah, they really do. You know, and we're using Shopify, but we can't use Shopify checkout. So we have to use a third-party payment process for checkout, which charges like crazy fees, and the user experience have to go to another site to check out and go back to Shopify. And it's kind of ridiculous. That's just for the hemp, which has been legal for years. So when it comes to, you know, also actually in the cannabis space, it was cash only for a really long period of time. And
still isn't crazy.
So you have people moving like boatloads of cash in trucks, which obviously has inherent risks. So that's the kind of stuff that people are trying to change.
I heard that there's a clause in I don't know, the federal tax law or something. I could be wrong on this, but I did hear that there's a clause that states that you still have to pay tax on proceeds of crime. So even if it's not legal and you're making money from it, you have to pay tax, which beggars belief. But I'm not sure if that's true. Are you paying tax on that, even if you're not allowed to, if you're only allowed to use cash?
Yeah, and there is no deductions at all for those businesses in any way, and the cash is due up front. So basically, it's just like an immediate influx of cash to states that legalize it. No deductions, all, you know, trucks moving around. It's kind of ridiculous.
Sorry to digress, but that reminds me of a case I remember learning about way back in the day at law school when we were learning about tax law. And I think it was in WA, they arrested this guy, prominent drug dealer, and they found like heaps of cash buried in his backyard. And so they said, oh, well, this forms part of your assessable income. And because they didn't have any rules against this at the time, he was actually able to claim deductions on that for all of his business operations. and yeah, they've cracked down on it since that case. But yeah, it was pretty well played. I remember thinking. Sorry, I'm now jumping back to something you said earlier. Social equity doesn't normally form part of our legislation over here, but you mentioned New York is kind of aiming to be the gold standard of cannabis regulation. What social equity measures have been sort of proposed as part of these laws that are coming in at the end of the year?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in this space, particularly in New York. And so it's particularly because, minority groups have been criminalized, like the war on drugs on the past. And so there's way uneven number of people, particularly like Black Americans, that are incarcerated for, criminal offenses regarding weed that are completely legal now. And that is crazy. And so, we've partnered with Last Prisoner Project, and they help, bring these people, like provide lawyers to be able to support their cases to try and get them out of jail and bring them back into society. But from a New York perspective, they've allocated a $200 million fund that prioritizes licenses for minority-owned businesses, and that also includes not only from people in like Black and Hispanic Americans, but also women-led businesses. So they're prioritizing them to get access to licenses and also provide them support to be able to get those licenses, funding for the licenses, and they're all prioritized above in front of everybody else. So they really seem to be genuinely trying to do that. There's also some states, can't remember exactly what they are, that paint this picture like that as well. And like to date, they have not given any licenses out to those kind of people. So there's a bit of posturing on some fronts, but New York really does seem to be genuine about it, and they've done it and made a lot of moves, and I feel we're in a really good spot to support.
That's a great cause. And I in light of that, I'd love to donate some of Andrew's time towards the cause.
Well, I'd need to read up on civil laws over in the US first, but Lewie, it has been a pleasure. We've loved hearing about what's going on over there, and I know it's all pretty fresh, but we might have to check in with you later this year as the momentum gathers and as you approach the impending commencement of all of the regulations over in New York, and sort of just check in and see how the brand is flying at that time. But yeah, it's just been an absolute pleasure and something different for our audience to sort of wrap their head around.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. It's great to chat with you guys. I love what you're doing, and you guys definitely going to have to come over here and taste our beverages. I'd love to say that I can send you some, but you're gonna have to
get intercepted, so we'll meet you on the ground over in Cali for a tasting.
We could actually import it. We just need to have a clinical reason for use. Yeah, we'd have to have a doctor.
Sure, between the two of you, you can work something out. Some reasons for it.
Yeah, well, hopefully in the not too distant future, we'll be able to just have CBD anyway. So
yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure, as Andrew said, and we'll hope to connect soon.
Yeah, awesome. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Lewie. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.
See ya.